Hello, my friends. How are you guys doing? I hope, wherever you are, that you are having a very fantastic week. Welcome to another episode of A Taboo Life, where everyone has a story to tell. I'm your host, Drew Franks, or Frank for short, and I want to thank you guys again for listening. Come check out the website, ataboolife.com, where you can read some interesting articles, short stories, poems, because I am that sappy, and other episodes of podcasts too. Don't forget to check it out at ataboolife.com. And if you love the podcast, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Sorry, getting a little tongue-tied. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on your podcast provider. This episode, along with the following episode, were recorded in Ashville, North Carolina. I am proud to say that I'm taking the podcast now to different locations to find unique and interesting people. I don't do the interviews over the phone or on Skype, only because as a business practice, I prefer talking to people face to face. It just makes for a better interview and makes it so I can actually connect to the person I am talking to, because I want to actually see the person, engage with them, and actually really get to know a person. So the only way I can do that is through face to face, which I'm really happy that I've taken the chance to actually drive out to North Carolina, because this episode was a really great episode. Mr. Cougar and Miss Shannon own Phenomenal Fungi, in which they grow mushrooms for local restaurants and for medicinal purposes too. We had a fantastic conversation about what mushrooms are, how they're great for the environment and really good for your body. And we talked a little bit about shamanism too. Fantastic episode, and I'm really grateful that I had a chance to interview both Cougar and Shannon, because they opened up their house to me. After the episode, they invited me to dinner. They made me a great trout meal made out of mushrooms and I believe brown rice too. But fantastic, and they were just fantastic people to talk to. I know I'll probably say fantastic a lot, but that's the only word that comes to my mind when I think about these two people. So here's the episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Alright guys, I'm over here in Black Mountain, North Carolina. I came up here for a little special episode with my two guests today, and they're visiting them at their lovely home here in the mountains. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Hey guys, my name's Cougar Eberhardt, and our company is Phenomenal Fungi. We grow medicinal and edible mushrooms.
And I'm Shannon Barrett. I'm technically the CEO, but Cougar does all of the hard work. I get to do the fun stuff, and we're happy to be here.
So, let's talk about mushrooms.
Let's do it.
Yeah, because before we started recording an episode, Cougar was showing me the actual process he goes through, the lab he has, the grow house, and really, really interesting stuff. The science behind it and the different type of mushrooms. So, actually, let's get started on the part. How do you guys start the business? Like, why mushrooms?
Well, honestly, Frank, that's a long story. I'll try and shorten it up. But about 30 years ago, started studying herbal medicine. Mm-hmm. Had some minor little health issues myself, and found that these herbal tinctures worked really, really well for me. So I started learning more how to make them. Mm-hmm. And so many, many years later, started getting on my radar about functional mushrooms as supplements. and taken various ones that were available on the market then, and some worked pretty well for me, others didn't, and thought, well, hey, I come from a background of making tinctures and this kind of thing. How hard can it be? And started doing some research and looking into it and finding out how to make these things, because they can be a little pricey. And so it started out just making them for me and Shannon, and then it went to, I guess, my mom and dad and family, and now to hers. So it started out kind of our beta testing was in essence on our friends and family to show them and that, these functional foods, as we call them, are perfectly adapted to helping us with our busy, crazy, wild lives that we all have.
And I thought he was crazy at first. I like mushrooms.
That was your reason?
Well, that was one. But he really does love mushrooms and the whole process, growing them, finding them, going out and foraging for them. And so that part I got, it was a hobby. But he kept talking about the benefits of mushrooms and how easy it was to create these tinctures that we could take that would help our health and everything. And I was like, okay, fine. And so he was doing that, and we were taking them personally, like he said, and giving them to family and friends. And I remember reading an article last year about Whole Foods saying that mushrooms was one of the hottest food trends for 2018. And so for me, a light bulb clicked, and I was like, there really is an audience out there. There really is an appreciation. There's a growing understanding of how phenomenal mushrooms are. And so I came home and I said, okay, you're not crazy. You're not crazy. Let's do this. And so we started really looking into it and just kind of organically have increased our products and built a website and created a logo and all those fun things. And so it's kind of starting to take off. So it's exciting.
Oh my God.
and it's cool. You got to be in on the sort of the beginning of it, or at least early in it. So
yeah, it's
thank you for that part of it.
You're welcome.
Helping us get our message out there to people. Education is a big part of what we do.
Yeah, I'm really excited about talk about the whole mushrooms. Because I thought it was just fascinating, especially what you showed me downstairs about the process of actually growing mushrooms, the stages that you cultivate them, and what the final product is. Earlier, I took for the people listening, I've taken pictures, so you could take a look at. You could look at the pictures on our website and Instagram too. But for the first time in my life, I was holding a full head of lion's mane. I'm like, man, this is actually pretty cool. It looks like a big brain.
Yeah, and really the beauty of that species, that genus, there really are only 3 species, and they all look similar. Mm-hmm. There are no poisonous lookalikes. So if you ever find that one in your neck of the woods, growing on some kind of, it'll always be on hardwood, and you happen to find it, if it looks anything like that, it's that.
Mm.
You can eat it.
So that's one of the rare ones that you can completely safely identify, even as a novice, because there's nothing else that looks anything like it. It looks like a big pom-pom, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. For those of you that can't see it at the moment, you'll have to check out the pictures later, like you said. But that particular mushroom now is getting so much. Now we're actually starting to see some double-blind human trials on this principally for 2 things. They're investigating it in treating Alzheimer's patients, and they've already had some remarkable first findings. Hard to say how significant they are statistically, just principally because the sample groups were too small. But the results they had were phenomenal, were just breathtaking, that we might actually finally have something that can make a difference. Sadly, nothing yet, even the fungal realm, doesn't have a way to reverse Alzheimer's. But it can virtually halt it in a large number of people with beginning to moderate.
And even dementia. So even neurological issues that are not diagnosed as Alzheimer's, lion's mane has definitely been found to be supportive. So it's supportive for all brain function. So even for me, I'm getting older. I have a lot of things going on in my life. There are days that I can't remember things. And I have noticed that with the lion's mane, it seems to help kind of alleviate some of that brain fog, even, those days where you feel kind of fuzzy. So even in a healthy person, there's definitely benefit that's being found from utilizing lion's mane. And as Cougar said, a lot more research is being done now in this field because there's really promising results. They're starting to see really promising results. So it's fascinating.
And honestly, for us, on most of the tinctures that we take, because like she said, we are healthy, that we're taking kind of the lower end of sometimes of the therapeutic dose, and yet we're still absolutely getting results. Also, one of the beautiful things about most of these functional foods is that they really have virtually no toxicity as we understand it. Now, anything can have a side effect, which to me is anything that was unintended. But some side effects can be positive, some can be neutral, and some are negative. I haven't ever seen any side effects with mushrooms that weren't neutral or positive.
Now, just one caveat. There are some people who have a sensitivity to mushrooms in general.
Okay.
They can, for some people, if you ingest a lot, you can get an upset stomach.
Okay.
But again, there's nothing toxic, other than if you're going out into the forest and foraging, you do have to be aware. That's one of the reasons that we really think that the work we're doing and other people around us, cultivating mushrooms. So we're cultivating a known species. We know where it came from. We know its background. We know everything that it's grown on. And so we can kind of trace all of that and make sure that it's not going to contain anything that could potentially be harmful. Unlike going out and looking for mushrooms and thinking you might have found a morel or something like that, and it's false morel, and there can be some bad side effects. Essentially,
the false morel contains a compound that oxidizes into hydrazine, which is jet fuel, is what we'll just call it.
Oh my
God. So the thing is, there are a percentage of the population that considers this a prime edible because it tastes good. You might eat it 6, 8, 10, 20 times with no effect, but once it shuts down your liver, you've got a problem. But that's, there's mycophobia is very real. There's a lot of people that are absolutely positively phobic of mushrooms, be that it can kill them, or they've heard all the rumors about the little magic mushrooms and those kinds of things. And commonly, the most common poisoning occurs because people didn't wash a mushroom that they went and got in the wild, or they didn't cook it. It's not from eating a poisonous species. That is not the most common. So if you harvest a lion's mane, which is perfectly good to eat raw, it won't hurt you, but it was in the wild and a bird peed on it,
you get
it's still got bacteria on it. So if you eat something raw out of the wild without thinking about what you're doing, of course you might get an upset stomach. But that is by far the most common poisoning. Outside of that, I think the estimate currently is that we believe that there are somewhere around 5 million total fungal species. Now, some of those won't produce mushrooms. Some of those be slime molds or any number of the other categories. There's lots of different types. And a lot of them don't ever produce any kind of fruiting body that we know of. Just common soil stuff. But without them, we wouldn't have soil.
Without them, we wouldn't be able to exist on this planet because fungi are the only thing that can actually break down trees. So think about it. If, a tree falls and nothing decays it, nothing causes it to break down and decay, over millennial, we would just have piles and piles and piles of dead trees lying around. So mushrooms are the only things that have an enzyme. It's an enzyme.
Specifically to break down lignin.
Right. Which is what makes trees, sturdy, stiff, and hard. So if it weren't for mushrooms, you couldn't walk around. We couldn't exist on this planet, really.
No.
So that's one of the amazing things that they do. You were going down a different track, but that
doesn't matter. The fact that they're such excellent recyclers, I mean, nothing in nature is ever wasted. Everything always gets used. So the beauty of, for us, we try to pattern our lives somewhat after the habits of mycelium. This is a concept that one of my mentors came up with. I think he came up with it. As far as I know, nobody before him.
He's promoted it at least.
Is Peter McCoy of Radical Mycology. And in essence, he, as far as I know, was the first one to propose the theory that these are completely aware beings, and that in our course of designing our systems and how to interact in the world, that we try to mimic fungal systems. Because in the past, I think principally Darwinism was saying that, the whole survival of the fittest model. That's definitely been proven incorrect, in my opinion, and in many others. It's definitely not survival of the smartest, because we'd be a completely different planet if that was the case. It really is survival of those that can adapt the best and the fastest is what genetics get passed on. So there really is no competition. It's just, but of course, as human beings, we see that the trees and the other plants, they're all competing for the same set of nutrients. Well, as it turns out, we'd be dead wrong, because the science has now shown absolutely using radioactively traced materials that not only do mycelium transport water and nutrients to various trees in exchange for sugars, but they are actually allowing, say, a fir tree who sees one of his little oak neighbors over here is struggling and he needs something in particular, they can downregulate that to the mycelial network and transfer it to that particular tree. And this has absolutely been shown by science. This is a science fact.
Right. So
you can't say that they are in any sort of competition. They are absolute and perfect concert.
So basically, the mycelium is acting as a intermediary or a
Sure.
It's
conduit on every level. It is the original World Wide Web. That is what our communication systems were designed based on fungal networks.
And just to clarify, mycelium is that white webby stuff that you see when you roll a log over in the forest. You can kind of think about it as like the roots of mushrooms. So mushrooms are the fruit bodies. So it's what grows from the mycelium. And without the mycelium, no mushrooms. But it is everywhere. So you can find mycelium all throughout the soil. If you dig down and you see the white sort of strands, sometimes when you're planting a garden or something, that's mycelium. And amazingly, it is a single cell. No, that's the hyphae.
That's true.
Yeah.
All of these systems within mushrooms and within the mycelium are all one cell wall thick. So unlike in our bodies, like we have 7 or 8 epidermal layers, and then we have several other dermal layers below that, we have many, many, many different cell levels thick as our division between us and between us and our environment. So as I was telling you before, we were talking about that before fungi were originally classified as related to plants, and as it turns out, they actually have more in common with animals than they do with plants. And interesting fact about that, we actually have a fungal ancestor. And this has been shown as a remnant in our DNA. And so at some point on this timeline, somewhere I think about 100 million years ago, in the developing of what would become humans, it was well before we would have been, I'm pretty certain. But we diverged, and the fungi apparently decided to take the strategy of they were going to keep their stomach on the outside and make their enzymes, and we were going to close our stomach in, and then we had to develop an alimentary canal in order to do that. So just 2 completely different pathways. But strangely, their pathway is older, and the only organisms I know that have survived all 5 extinction events on this planet are fungi.
And they exist on every continent.
Every single continent,
Even
there are
Antarctica.
mycelium. There may not be fruit bodies that form very often in Antarctica, but guaranteed, if the conditions change like we're seeing, and we start seeing melting there, I guarantee you'll start seeing fruit bodies form from these things. And here's how I know this to be true. There was actually a couple of years ago that some people would say a fossil was found down below the seafloor. They were digging some kind of core drilling, and they found this. It looked like it could have been a fragment from a gilled mushroom. Turns out it was. Here's the really phenomenal part, that they took this thing into a lab. It's under the ocean. All this pressure, all this, there's no way it could be getting hardly any oxygen. And somehow they revived these cells. And this thing was actually able to produce a partial fruit body from something that's just been all under all this pressure and weight at the bottom of the ocean all this time. So fungi don't really die generally. I mean, they can, but more commonly they enter a state of suspended animation, and they really are quite the masters of it.
Well, it's just like with the way that we cultivate mushrooms. So for most of ours we use bags, and so I think Cougar probably explained to you a little bit about inoculating. They have to have a substrate, so they've got to have a food source, and so we inoculate the substrate. Usually it's a mixture of wood pellets and alfalfa. And, that's all packed into a plastic bag. And so the mycelium will form, and it will run throughout that substrate until it gets to a certain point, and then it'll just sit there for the most part until the conditions change. So until you introduce more light and oxygen, and it knows then it's time to fruit, it will be happy to sit there and wait.
Well, in nature, that's a survival strategy, because what it allows for is the mushroom fruiting body is exactly the same cells as the hyphae and mycelium. For somehow it's like they bundle on themselves, and it produces this little three-dimensional mass that's capable of producing spores to reproduce itself. But if you start thinking like a mushroom does, if it just has all the food that it needs all the time under the ground, it's not going to waste its energy on fruiting.
They're very efficient.
It's going to keep sending out hyphae in every direction, and when it finds places that are useful to it, it will concentrate its resources on those areas. It'll even go back and double check sometimes, use up some resources, go back and fill in other areas that maybe weren't as good then. Generally speaking, what causes mycelium to stop and produce a fruit body is that it either runs out of food or it runs against a barrier. So in our case, we've got it in a plastic bag or a jar or whatever we're growing in. Well, obviously it hits a wall. It can't go any further. So then it sits there for a few days, and it keeps growing completely throughout every bit of that. So no longer is it exploring. We call that consolidating. So it's focusing all its energy to take over every bit of territory it has. Once it's done that, like she said, it will just sit there and wait. But if you poke a hole in that bag and you put it where there's some light and you lower the temperature a little bit, so there again, hyphae's worked its way up to the top of the ground. It can now, through the leaves, it sees a little bit of light. It's getting more oxygen, less CO2. All these things are what we call pinning triggers. Mushrooms don't need light to produce energy. They don't use photosynthesis. But they do use light as a trigger to produce fruits because, well, I guess if they grow underground all the time and they finally reach the end of their territory, that would make sense.
It's a trigger.
So if you can think like a mushroom, they're really not hard to grow. With knowing just a few things and a few pieces of simple equipment, anybody can grow oyster mushrooms. Anybody.
And that's you'll see kits. There are kits available, like even in...
Like on Amazon.
Exactly. Amazon, Whole Foods, places like that. They're typically going to be oyster mushrooms because they are so easy to grow. And it's just like we were saying, they're packaged, in a bag. You get them at home. You open up the box. You cut a slit in the plastic, and boom, you'll have oyster mushrooms growing in no time. Some of ours, if they find a weakness in the bag, like around the filter patch, or if by some chance there's a little nick in the bag or something, they will find it and they will grow through that tiny, tiny little opening.
Wow.
They're amazing.
I mean, I've had things that I've grown on some of our cultures that we'll grow on Petri dishes, which is those little round plates that essentially look like they have Jell-O on them, that we all use to reproduce things with. And if you leave them too long in the plates, they actually start fruiting in the plates.
Mm-hmm. We've got some
pictures. So remind me, I'll show you later. I've got a lion's mane that's fruiting in a petri dish because this thing just does not take no for an answer.
Right.
Mushrooms don't quit. They don't stop. You know, they really are the masters of their domain. And I truly believe that humanity would do well to try to pattern our lives after some of their understandings.
Well, and there are researchers and scientists and designers even that are now starting to look at mushrooms and mycelium in particular. There have been some different applications. I'm trying to remember the subway system and
that was
with the slime mold.
They were using slime mold, which is this crazy yellow, slimy looking, but it really does. I mean, if you watch the thing move, it really seems to have some kind of volition. Yeah. You don't want to say a mind of its own with no nervous system, but at any rate, these researchers, this is one of these crazy ideas, but this is brilliant. These researchers were working on how to improve the amount of redundancy that was proper for a subway system. You can't just connect every point to every other point. That's tens of thousands of connections, and it's just not efficient. Mm-hmm. So they had the idea, well, let's see what slime mold would do. So on every intersection, they put a rolled oat. And so this thing, whether it uses smell or chemically or however it completely searches out its prey, that's what it was doing. But it turns out it forms exactly the right amount of redundancy so that if one link between one oat and another is severed, it has at least one other way currently that it can reach that nutrient without having to expend any more resources to reach more food. It is one of the most blindingly efficient systems that I have ever seen. In fact, I dare say, and I challenge humans on this one, you can find a way to improve on what fungi can really do. I want to see it. Now, the exclusion I want to make to that is that there are a lot of molecules that are being artificially engineered into fungi. Like let's start off on an easy one. Citric acid. Mm-hmm. It's in every soda, every fizzy drink you've ever had. They put it in all kinds of stuff. Well, everybody thinks citric acid comes from oranges, right? It comes from citrus. You'd be wrong. All citric acid now pretty much is currently made by a common black mold that has been genetically engineered to produce citric acid and nothing else. So it's been tricked into believing that citric acid is its own compound, and it was smart enough to actually figure out how to produce it.
Oh my God.
So that's one of the things about being adaptable with mushrooms in particular, well, with fungi. They can be trained to accept different materials as a food source. So you mentioned Peter.
Yeah, here's what, actually my favorite one on that is actually told by Paul Stamets. Mm. And if you guys don't know who Paul Stamets is, I'm just going to say that's one of those you're going to have to DuckDuckGo or Google or whoever your search engine is. But he runs a company called Fungi Perfecti, and he's an amazing mycologist, and he has some brilliant ideas on what fungi can do.
And it's probably done more to advance the variety of things that fungi can do and advance a lot of different research around the use of fungi. So
here's one of my most extreme examples that I'm aware of. Fungi can break down chemical bonds. Well, in chemistry, all you chemistry heads out there will know that a phosphorus bond in chemistry can be terribly hard to break, certainly at room temperature. So in some of these really terribly complex chemical agents that we've developed for warfare, like nerve gas, these are phosphorus-based compounds. Mm-hmm. So in order to destroy them, it takes like 1,700 degrees centigrade for like 20 hours to degrade the VX nerve gas molecule. Well, as it so happens, there are an ordinary genus of mushrooms that can do this same reaction at room temperature. So they can degrade VX nerve gas into non-poisonous components without the addition of heat. And we think we're good chemists? We're just starting to figure out what they know how to already do, what they are masters of. one of my other mentors, Trad Cotter with Mushroom Mountain, came up with a brilliant idea of how to do. He said, well, what would it take to produce a custom-made antibiotic? Okay, let's say you get some kind of an infection, and it's one of those we can tell is ripping through your body like crazy. So taking the time to ID it can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could just take a sample and do something to create a direct, respondable antibody to that, that would be valuable. So what he's doing, he found, I don't even know what the species is, but some kind of mushroom. He grows the blocks in the bags like we do. The difference is he leaves a big dent in the top of it, and the mycelium doesn't, water beads up on it. It doesn't soak water in. But as you put this unknown bacterial contaminant on it, it immediately starts sweating and producing these colored, usually kind of rust-colored or yellow-colored exudates. Some people call it that they're peeing or it's sweat or whatever, but I guess you're right, honestly. But in essence, what you've created is a direct enzymatic antibody to that particular, in this case, unknown bacteria that can be ready in 24 hours to be given to the patient. And so far, the preliminary testing on it is they haven't had any side effects. So unlike many of these other things that they're targeting, gene therapy and whatnot, when they work perfectly, they have brilliant results. But we don't yet understand enough about it for that to be perfect systems yet. So I like the idea of sticking with systems that we can create possibly new fungal antibodies that, let's say, we might find out in the testing that they don't promote resistance anymore, or not to the same degree. Half the time, by the time they get a new antibiotic halfway through testing for human use, it commonly already is starting to have at least one organism that's already resisting it. So we're running out of antibiotics, and they're starting to really pay attention to the fungal realm because of that 5 million species that I talked about that we've estimated maybe that there might be 1,000 that we know how they fruit, what they look like. And then of that, there might be 300 or 400 that are edible. Of that, there are really 9 or 10 species that we eat, and commercially cultivated, there are really only one species as 3 varieties. Because button mushrooms, portobellos, criminies, all of those are actually the same species. They are different varieties. So what most people knows completely as mushrooms is all one species.
Wow. It's pretty deep.
I told you it was a deep rabbit hole, brother.
It was deep. So let's start with the process. How do you... Because you showed me how you grow the mushrooms. Why don't you explain to the audience the steps you take to grow them?
Well, the most important step, in my opinion, is to have source to good... excuse me. To have source of good strains. So one of the things that we do here at Phenomenal Fungi is to source out new strains in the wild. And part of what I look for is stuff that grows really large, bright colors, whatever the natural color of that mushroom is. But one of the things I really try to focus on is something that grows on something unusual, something that's not normally found on. The reason for that is here we have so many different conifers that are dying out because of other things that if we had more mushrooms that fruited well on the conifer wood wastes, we could make use of some of those things. So that's one of the ways. But anyway, once we've got good strains and I've brought them in and I've cleaned them up to make sure there's no other contaminants in there, we do a small fruiting of them. And it's usually done on some type of grain. Can be just ordinary, wheat or rye grains. My favorite at the moment is millet and sorghum because it's a smaller grain, so it has more points of inoculation in it. You put a small amount of it, and it grows in it faster, in essence. So once we fruit out a little small amount of it to make sure that it will actually fruit, we process them into these bags that Shannon was talking about a minute ago. that are polypropylene, and they actually could be sterilized if you wanted to. And they've got a little piece of, essentially it's kind of like Tyvek. It's a little membrane that's made into it that allows for just a little bit of oxygen and CO2 to pass back and forth. But the beauty of the ones that we use is they actually, when they're sealed, they inflate slightly. And in doing that, it's like it keeps positive pressure on it. So even if there was a tiny pinhole leak, it's pretty rare for these bags to contaminate. And honestly, up until very recently, all the blocks that I was making, I had to sterilize once I had the substrate in the bag, which in our case, we're using, some type of a sawdust, and then we add some type of a nitrogen source. It can be anything from partially ground wheat, for if you've got a mill local to where you are. You can use, some of old hay off fields if it's been recently harvested. There's all kinds of
coffee grounds.
Coffee grounds is another good one because it's already been brewed, so it's already kind of pasteurized as long as you use it in a day or two. Otherwise, you have to sterilize it again. But what we've been working with mostly recently is two different techs, if you will, for being able to, one is for cultivating various species of mushrooms with a pasteurized tech, which means we can add off the boil or just boiled water to this substrate, and it's sterilized enough. And we have another one that's just done with cold water, which is amazing in that up until now, anything I ever tried with cold water contaminated 20 or 30%. And the stuff I'm working with now, I've done 60 bags, and I don't have a single contaminated bag. So that's not my doing. That's the fungi's doing. These guys are the ones doing the real work. But we got to give them a fighting chance. And so once we've put them in these bags, they sit in a room that's a bit warmer, like 75, 77 degrees, in the dark, just like they'd be if they're in the ground. And they sit there and incubate for a week or two until they're fully colonized. And then we move them into a fruiting chamber, which currently for us is a 10 by 10 hydroponics tent. It's mylar on the inside and just black nylon on the outside. So it's sealed and it keeps the light in. Like I said before, mushrooms don't use light for photosynthesis, but it does help them produce mushrooms. So we have to have some kind of light there. And some of the medicinal compounds are dependent upon light as well. So whereas with plants, if they need light, you can do your light like 12 hours, 12 on, 12 off. With mushrooms, if you're trying to produce medicinal compounds, why not go 20 on and 4 off? Get as much medicinal compound as you can. We've also found in some studies, and we want to do some more of our own to substantiate this further, but most gilled mushrooms, which is every mushroom most people are ever going to see, except for a chanterelle or a morel, if you dry it in the sun, gills up, it produces vitamin D2 and will store it in its dried form.
Well,
vitamin D. So instead of having to be out in sunlight and get enough vitamin D, all the doctors talking about how 85% of us are vitamin D deficient. There's an easy solution. Anybody can grow oyster mushrooms. So you let your oyster mushrooms get like the clusters I showed you, nice and big, and you set them outside somewhere where the squirrels can't get to them because they will run off with them, and leave them gill side up. Even just for a few hours, but if you do that a couple days in a row, one of the compounds, ergosterol or ergosterol, depending on who you ask, converts to vitamin D2, which is the best bioavailable form that I know of for human beings. So instead of taking a big horse pill of vitamin D that you're only going to get 15% of it, maybe, and they're saying, oh, this is 300% of the daily. Yeah, if you could get it all. The D2 you get from mushrooms, you get something like 75 to 85% biologically. So there's much less of it there in milligrams, but by the time you're ingesting it, you're getting almost all of it. And in a plant source form, quote unquote. even though they're not really plants.
But yeah.
It's in an ionic form for the nerds out there.
So which main mushrooms are you guys focusing on right now? And what benefits do they have?
The ones we're focused the most on right now, lion's mane is one of our principles, mainly because of there's so many people that, as Shannon was saying, we're all getting older and our memories aren't quite as good as they used to be. And this is one of those things that really does seem to help. And the more we study about the various dementias and Alzheimer's, they're finding that actually about 30 years before onset of symptoms, they have found those same beta amyloid plaques that form in the brain in our guts, in our small intestine. So actually, we now potentially have a way to know 30 years before onset that we're already susceptible. So being able to work with a mushroom that potentially intervention at that point in time might make it so that you never had any dementia symptoms at all. We just don't have enough information yet. But it is by far the most promising treatment that I have ever seen and has that potential. So that's one of our huge focuses. Plus, we just happen to like it. Well, Shannon's not a huge fan of it cooked. Mm-hmm. But
it's good in smoothies.
We'll see what you think later on that.
Yeah, they are making me a nice little dinner tonight. I'm so excited.
Sorry, I got interrupted. Where was I?
The other mushrooms that we're introducing.
Oh, the other mushrooms. Another one that's probably the big one for me is called cordyceps. And this is a little entomopathogen. This is one that essentially it preys on insects. And specifically the two species we work with form on caterpillars. They have a lot of benefits for helping us to modulate our energy without being a stimulant. So they don't drop you. And they don't get you all speedy. If you overdo it, you don't even really notice. So it really does work to a point. Most of the mushrooms seem to help us to normalize systems. So if your system is already, let's say your immune system's already running kind of hot, it actually tends to downregulate those people's immune system. Where for most of us, it would upregulate our immune system to help us treat something. That's how beta-glucans are supposed to work. So anyway, the lion's mane, the cordyceps, that's our two principles. We grow enough reishi to be able to make tinctures from and other edible species, the oysters.
I was going to say, you almost forgot
oysters.
No. Yeah.
No, and then everything else we do is pretty well seasonal. The lion's mane and the cordyceps, if you keep temperatures and things like that, you can do those year-round with a little bit of effort. The oysters, certain ones do better certain times of the year, and some of them just will not grow in the warmer times of the year. Fortunately, they're also tropical and pan-tropical oyster species, so we just grow those in the summertime.
And they're some of the prettiest ones, I think.
They really are. It's a shame the yellows,
gorgeous.
As bright yellow as they are, it's a shame they're so fragile because you just can't hardly ship them. So you just about have to live close enough where somebody produces them in order to even get to see them. Because people have tried putting them in the blister packs and all the different things. Nobody's figured out a good way to ship it. They're just too brittle.
And the pinks are not much sturdier.
They're not much better.
They're not much better, but they're so pretty. And I want them to stay the same color when you cook them, but they don't.
No.
They all look like just any kind of mushroom when you cook them. So the color changes for some reason.
Hey, that brings up a good segue. There's a lot of misinformation about how to properly cook a mushroom.
Oh yeah, because I remember,
or how to eat a mushroom. Well, I'm not going to say that you can't ever eat a raw mushroom. So if you like your little button mushrooms off the salad bar or whatever, they're not going to hurt you. What I will tell you is if you eat a mushroom raw, you're absolutely not getting any nutritional benefit from it at all.
You're getting some fiber.
Yes. Human beings do not have the enzyme chitinase. And mushrooms and mycelium are all made from chitin. Chitin is the same exact material as crab shell, as ant skeleton, all of that. It's a very durably hard material, even though mycelium feels soft to us. But so in order to get the benefits, to eat them, you have to cook them. You have to break those little cellular bonds so that those materials can get out so our body can break it down. Actually, as it turns out, most mushrooms, the more you cook them, the better it is. There are a few exceptions. Lion's mane's one of them. But oysters, just about the longer you can cook them, the better. And what I have found, my preference, a lot of texts and whatnot tell you to put your butter in the pan, get it sizzling, then put your mushrooms in. I don't ever start with oil. I always start with just water. And as the pan starts to get dry, where the mushrooms start to stick or whatever, add just enough water to deglaze and keep doing that till the mushroom is most of the way cooked. Then add your butter or your olive oil or ghee or coconut oil, and I only recommend those 4. Don't ever put margarine on a mushroom.
Yeah, you're not supposed to use margarine at all. It's not real. It's not. I remember my uncle told me that he left butter open in the garage once with margarine right next to it, and none of the flies went to the margarine.
That should tell everybody everything they need to know if a fly won't eat it.
Yeah, flies like,
So by doing it that way, by putting your oil in last, it still lets you can get them nice and crispy on the outside if you like them that way. And yet you've already got the mushroom almost like thoroughly steamed or cooked before you do that. And I really think you get better results that way. But if not, doesn't matter. You could do just oil if that's your preference. The main thing is to cook them and cook them fairly well. And the other thing I recommend for people, especially with wild mushrooms, and especially on one you've never tried before, don't go hog wild the first time you've ever eaten morels. Eat a few. See how you do. There are a rare few people that actually have allergies to certain species that are totally edible and they have no compounds that we know to be toxic. And yet some people still have a reaction. So the best way to be truly smart and educated is to, when trying a new mushroom for the first time, don't eat a half a pound of it.
But if you like bacon, or if you like bacon-like
I love bacon
products, one of my favorite ways is the way that Cougar cooks the Kings. Oh my gosh, he makes bacon essentially. Cut them long ways, kind of thin, and cook. Essentially fry them and put a little bit of butter on them and
smoke and a little smoked paprika, so that even though you'd never mistake it for bacon,
no,
it has a very bacony flavor. And to me, I think I could actually learn to do that instead of bacon most of the time.
Yeah, we're not vegetarians, but there is something appealing to me about mushrooms and the fact that, 1, they have so many health benefits. 2, you can get a level of protein from them. So if you are a vegetarian or vegan, they're a great source of nutrients. But they're also sustainable. It's not something that has a huge carbon footprint. If anything, they, like the way we're growing them, you can take things from the waste stream. So you're taking products out of the waste stream, like spent coffee grounds or sawdust.
Or, down the road from us, there's a manufacturer that makes and reconditions old pallets. So they've got all these little tiny fine oak shavings that they've got these huge piles of, which for them is something I don't know if they have to pay to get rid of it or somebody just picks it up and they sell it. I don't know, but somebody is having to dispose of that. So we use a certain percentage of that in the ones that we do. So we're trying to close as many local waste streams as we can. And as I pointed out to Frank earlier, really for us, the only, in my opinion, negative impact that we have carbon-wise at the end of our grow is these plastic bags, which we've already done 3 or 4 fruitings in. And they're now working on making a nice biodegradable technology on that. But up until very recently, that wasn't available. But here again, this is one of the advantages to coming out here and teaching like this, is the more people who know these things, the more people can request them. And then we'll see these things become common. But that is our entire waste stream. There are no poisonous chemicals of any kind that we produce. When these blocks, that we call them spent blocks, after they've fruited for us as much as they're gonna, if they're still intact, we just set them outside, essentially on the compost pile. And do they not usually fruit 2 or 3 more times when they're just sitting there?
Yeah, they'll fruit again. And the other thing is, like we were talking about before with the mycelium, but we're now putting them back into our environment. So we're putting them back into the soil. They're going back in, and they're helping to actually increase the nutrient levels in the soil. So they're making it better for other plants and things to grow. So they're full cycle. Yeah. I mean, they're just, yeah.
And for you master gardeners out there, one of the things that enjoys spent oyster mushroom mycelium above all other things is the common ordinary earthworm. So for you guys out there who do vermicomposting, you're into raising your own worms, man, you need to be growing oyster mushrooms. Because first of all, you can eat all those mushrooms that you grow. And at the end of it, you put these blocks in your worm beds. Boy, you want to talk about something tearing something up. These things are crazy. They love mycelium.
Yeah.
So for us, what other things can you produce into a food that has almost no waste stream? And you can actually utilize local waste streams
to clean, or actually grow it.
Yeah.
Something we were talking about earlier, that because you said you were trained with Paul Stamets, and you talked about something that he found out as a new type of basically industry.
Are you talking about mycoremediation?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, as far as I know, that term was absolutely attributed to him, and I'm pretty sure he was the first one to ever use it. Mycoremediation, to just make it simple, is a way of applying mycology systems to our natural system. So let's say those things in nature that we've messed up as human beings, that we've made them dirty places or contaminated. There's generally a species of mushroom that has no trouble degrading whatever that toxin is. And here's a really good example. There was an area that they had a lot of, it was an old fuel depot. So there was a lot of...
this is in Washington State.
Yes, in Washington State. And there were a lot of VOCs in the soil.
Now explain what...
just organic compounds, volatile organic compounds. And in this case, all these were, petrochemical residues from diesel fuel, and probably then would have been leaded gasoline. So really high numbers as far as that went, and they did multiple piles and different strategies, and one was using some kind of chemical enzymes. Another one was a chemical process that was supposed to break the chemical bond. And then the one that Paul Stamets and his group used was mycelium and sawdust spawn of a particular oyster mushroom. And they covered these things over with plastic. They waited 4 weeks. They came back and just took the plastic off and looked under the piles. First 2 or 3 piles, there was really no difference, or not positive. Some of them were really stinky then and stuff like that, where obviously anaerobic had come into play. Anaerobic so far doesn't break down petroleum very well. When they uncovered the Stamets group, there were I've seen the pictures, some of the largest oyster mushrooms I've ever seen. Some of them look like the size of a dinner plate. And in most of the testing that we've done, outside of potentially for heavy metals, those mushrooms would actually be edible. They actually dismantle the petrochemical molecules. So these very persistent cyclene-based, compounds in nature that degrade very, very slowly, oyster mushrooms can adapt to very, very quickly with the arsenal that they have of enzymes. They have the ability to manufacture custom-made enzymes. And so this is just one little tiny example of how we can apply these things to sites that we have damaged. But since, like I said, there's virtually a species for any chemical, several people have done this as a test. I personally haven't done it yet, and I probably will, but there are many people who've grown oyster mushrooms on cigarette butts, used cigarette butts.
Hmm.
So, boy, you want to talk about a nasty set of compounds. There's something like 360 compounds, about half of which are known to the state of California to be carcinogenic, that are found in that little cellulose cigarette filter after people smoke it.
And it takes forever for them to break down in a landfill.
10,000 years, give or take.
Yeah.
Compounds might break down faster than that. But at any rate, what you can actually do, you can start out by training an oyster. I say training, that's not a very kind term. Allowing them to eat it. And you expose them to
it, yeah.
First of all, the cigarette butts that they haven't been smoked. So you want to get them onto that certain kind of cellulose first. Once you've got them on that, you start out with a small amount of the tars and all of that. And as you work your way up, their enzymes get stronger and stronger and stronger. But in this case, Paul did that all in one step. He just inoculated it and just let it take over. So in ways, I mean, there's even ways to get even more dramatic reductions. And if I remember right, this is from memory, seems like the starting level was 151 of whatever it is, parts per million or whatever. And the level went from 151 to 25 in 4 weeks. And for pencyclic hydrocarbons, that is virtually unheard of, to my knowledge, any other way. So yet another way that fungi can indeed save the planet.
And there's actually one that it's the plastic eating.
Oh, Pestalottiopsis. Yeah, we haven't quite worked the technology details on this one out yet, but there is actually a fungus that can break down the polyurethane molecule. So, in essence, any PET or PETE plastic, the most common plastics that we have, they could break down. Problem is, it's how to get them from eating what they normally do to straight plastic. So you got to granulate it. You got to break it down part way first. We haven't fully figured out how to inspire this thing to produce its full canon of enzymes that it would need to break down the plastic straight. But I personally think that if science will apply itself to it, this is certainly one we could certainly figure out. So yeah, then we could start degrading plastics.
Well, and take it a step further. Let's not even use plastics. There's a company that just went out of my head. And anyway, there's a company. I'll think of the guy's name who founded it. He's done a great TED Talk. But essentially, what they are doing is they're creating packing foam or packing material. So they create custom packing material for like shipping, like TVs and components and things like that from mycelium. So they've created forms. And they just grow the mycelium into the right shape to be packing material. And it essentially, it's like glue. It, kind of works as a glue and creates this very hard form once it dries a little bit. That's completely biodegradable. Wow. And so,
you put that out in nature and it totally reverses. Yeah. And here's the one thing that they encountered they didn't expect. When they first started making the molds, they didn't account for that these things would shrink a little as they grew. So once they knew how much it shrunk, they had to make their forms a little bit bigger. So like the corners that we make out of styrofoam for in TVs and stuff like that. That's principally what they're making. Ecovative is the name of the company.
Yeah,
Ecovative Industries.
And if you Google TED Talks, can mushrooms replace plastic? I think is the name of his TED Talk. It was really interesting. They're doing all kinds of things now, too. They're also working with the fashion industry and creating materials to replace leather from mycelium. They're
actually stronger than leather. They just haven't figured out how to make it thick enough to make it wear long enough to be profitable yet.
Yeah. Okay. There are other people. You're going to a class next weekend about how to build a pizza oven out of mycelium bricks.
So, in essence, a way to make a building material that is at least fire insulative. I'm going to predict and say that slowly over time the interior would burn. So you might have to re-brick it eventually or something. But the idea, to be able to produce a brick that doesn't produce the alkali lime and all those other potentially poisonous streams, to be able to produce something that will do that same function, that's what excites us about various mushrooms. I spend more time reading, scientific peer-reviewed studies and what people are trying to grow or make or build or, whatever from mushrooms, just because I really do believe that they can change a lot of our current models for the better. I'd like to see them completely change the form of so-called consumerism that there is on this planet. That this making things that are, planned obsolescence, that something is planned to fail in a year, instead of making it where it lasts 15, like everything we used to buy was made.
Well, that's kind of
we've been taught as consumers how to take the things that we kept our whole lives and now treat them as throwaway.
Well, that's one thing I think companies, I think a good example will be Toyota. Other companies basically like Ford. Let's say Ford. The cars weren't that well built quality wise, but then you have Toyota, who does, makes a fantastic car and it's going to last. Mm-hmm. And they even hold their retail value or resale value because of that. That whole model's like, okay, let's build something that's going to work for a long time.
Exactly. And there are lots of examples like that you can use. We have a Subaru. Subaru's the same kind of, business model. It's built to last. It's built to be safe, and that's one of the reasons we have it. Is because it's a big item to buy, so we want to invest in things that are going to be quality and are going to last.
I mean, if they had a decent electric car that could capture, the ambient energy and be able to store it properly in batteries that wasn't $150,000, I would consider owning one. But at this point, with all of our electricity, or so much of it being produced now by coal and natural gas now, which is much more of a greenhouse gas emitter than any of our other fossil fuels in the past, and yet it keeps being called clean energy. Really no such thing. We really need to redefine that model so that when we're looking at profits or profitability in a structure, we need to look at what the total cost is. Not what the item cost.
That's what I want to do. I want to see what mushrooms could do for energy production.
Well, actually, as it turns out, there's some very interesting preliminary studies there producing various biofuels. And the beauty of that is it is not dependent upon grains, and most specifically corn. But until we break our addiction to the way in which we eat meat, we are going to, most of our grain is going to go into the production of meat.
Yeah, one couple guys at work, we were talking about this, and I got a little obsessed with this. The Impossible Burger. Have you guys ever heard about that?
I have.
Anybody, I have not tried this yet. I'm going to try it this weekend because I saw here in Asheville that there are a couple of restaurants that do serve it. Basically, it's a meatless burger, but they use vegetable matter for the actual material, but the same, if I remember what the website said, the same molecule that's used in meat, that's all of us have, is that taste, that bloody taste. They grow it, they ferment it like beer. And instead of getting alcohol, you get this protein or this molecule, then they put it with the vegetable matter, and it's like you can't really tell the difference. It tastes really good.
Wow, I would be interested in you getting back to us on that, especially if you really like it. Well, one of the things that you touched on there, though, was the what gives us that sensation of eating meat. And the best studies I've ever seen on that is it's the glutamates.
Yeah, I think that's what...
Well, one of the only non-meat sources you will ever find on the planet for glutamates is in the mushrooms. So mushrooms feed that fifth taste, that umami. Mm-hmm. So in essence, they bring out the flavor of everything. If this isn't common knowledge to you, play around with it and see if you don't find that to be true. That if you add mushrooms, if you're working from fresh mushrooms to a dish, see if it doesn't elevate the taste of the snap peas that are in there or whatever. It's something about that molecule, and yet we know when we just put MSG on it, which, it makes the flavor very similar, just too many side effects. So here's another one of those where, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's realize that we have better options. And because very much like, I'm pro hemp, mainly because an acre of hemp will produce the same amount of usable pulp fiber as that same acre of 20-year pine. The difference is it only takes a year to produce that.
And less material, too.
And the hemp is one of the few things that actually increases many of the bioavailabilities of soil. So it actually improves the soil that it's grown in. One of the rare plants that does that.
And it's good, like, finally the government actually legalized that now, where we're going to get farmers, like, okay.
Well, they're actually farming it here now.
Yeah, they started doing it.
Here in North Carolina.
Well, and, with the Farm Bill that was passed last year.
Which is smart. Finally, the government did something smart.
Exactly.
It finally made CBD available to us, because prior to that, they wanted to say, well, that is a marijuana product.
Technically, CBD is still in a very gray area in North Carolina. Yeah.
You can buy it in Florida.
You can buy it up here just because, but this is all because of the Farm Bill. So with the Farm Bill, they actually removed the restrictions of being able to transport hemp across state lines, and there were other aspects of the bill too. So it's made it really possible for farmers now to grow hemp for agricultural reasons.
And not to mention the CBD personally that we use is hemp derived.
Yeah.
So now that they've legalized hemp here, they can't really say that a product of a legal product is not legal. That's the only reason that it is technically legal.
Well, again,
it's a gray area.
It's a gray area because there are a lot of different agencies involved, and I was having to do research for this for my real job. So.
Completely different subject for another time. So, I think I answered as much as I can about the different species and what can be done with it. Was there any other very specifics?
I'll say, so some of the things we're doing, obviously we have a lot of passion around mushrooms and are very interested in all the different aspects, different things that they can do. But from a business standpoint, what we're really focusing on right now is growing mushrooms. So growing fresh mushrooms, edible mushrooms for folks, restaurants, farmers markets, things like that. We're also, David has an amazing, Cougar has an amazing culture library. He's been collecting cultures for a while. And I think you said this earlier. He's very picky about the type of culture, the source of the mushroom. And so he's got a great collection. So we're also selling cultures. For anybody who's interested in growing their own, they can purchase cultures from us. And then we started, really, like we said, this all started from the tinctures that he was making. And so we have a whole line of tinctures as well that we're producing. So for right now, that's sort of our concentration.
We do focus. Eventually. We've had quite a few of our customers have reached out to us, and they don't quite feel confident enough yet to just purely grow them on their own. So what we're looking at doing is instead of producing the little tiny little grow blocks that you get from like where Shannon was talking about online and Amazon and all those, which, you might get them to fruit, but what we're looking at doing is actually selling people commercial blocks that they're already colonized, like the blocks you saw down in our colonization room. And selling them a block like that that's already colonized, that it's not going to 50% fail for them, It's going to produce results. And its chances are it's going to produce 3-4 flushes, different picking of them, so that anybody can realize that they can do this. And then maybe once they do that, then maybe they can take the next step to being able to make those blocks for themselves. Because actually they can be made with easily gotten materials. And one of the things that we are going to be doing in the future is start branching into doing some teaching videos of how to make substrates and how to test different iterations for substrates and even how to maybe isolate cultures. If enough people show an interest in that, I would consider making a video on it, even if it's just something that gets posted on our site. We do maintain a site through Etsy, so anybody who's digging the products that we're talking about today can always look for us there, or they can find us through phenomenalfungi.com. Or you can also call us at 1-833-GO-FUNGI.
Go Fungi.
That's Cougar's favorite, is the Go Fungi phone number.
Go Fungi.
I mean, we had to have a commercial phone number anyway when we looked, and there was one that was actually would spell out Go Fungi. How could I turn that down?
Go Fungi.
So if we can just get people interested in mushrooms, or just expand their thinking about, beyond just the button mushrooms that you see on a pizza, that would make us very happy. Oh, and I do write a blog. Yeah, sorry. Cougar's he's trying to spell out blog.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what he was doing.
I know.
Like, how you spell?
Dude, it was backwards from where you're sitting. You'd have never figured that out.
But yeah, we do try to share the things we're learning, the things that we're finding out, what we're discovering, what we're experiencing going through this business. So we share that on the blog, which is on phenomenalfungi.com. But yeah, if we can just bring awareness to more people about the amazing capacity of mushrooms, that's our goal.
I mean, last weekend I took a course with at Mushroom Mountain. So far, the states don't require any licensing for foraging. But as it is, I see that's where it's going to go. So I kind of decided, since there's somebody out there teaching that and it's a certification program, why not? That's a good certification to have. Well, they currently are certifying it. So this is assuming I passed all these species. I haven't gotten my certificate back yet. But with any luck, I'll now be certified to collect and sell 21 different species of wild fungi. And honestly, most people with a little tiny bit of instruction could comfortably always identify 5. So if anybody's interested in learning about that, find a way to reach out to us. We'll see what we can do to either set you up with a link or the different information that you would need for that until we're providing it for you. We're working on all that. Building a business from scratch takes time. We do appreciate all of those customers and clients of ours that love the whole buying local model, and we really support that. It's like we like to put proceeds in the hands of the owners and not the hands of the middlemen. So I believe that's an important one. And I guess I've kind of wrapped up a thought. So
yeah, we were talking about this during lunch. I started thinking about it, since basically this episode is about mushrooms. We're talking about shamanism, and I was thinking about how mushrooms are considered part of a lot of religious cultures.
Certainly.
Do you know anything about that, or?
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit. Why not? Just for everybody's knowledge here, I'll just throw this one out on the table. I've been a shamanic practitioner for about 35 years. So I still don't call myself a shaman. There's a lot of complicated political reasons behind that for me. I have friends that call me that, but not the point. So for me, it is a part of my heritage. I've had elders that this was something that was given to us, and what we're talking about specifically here, let's just all be adults. We're talking about the psilocybe species. We're talking about the ones that are being currently investigated for PTSD and anxiety specifically. Researched, yes.
Yeah, guys, it's a legitimate studies. One of them is not Boston University. Johns Hopkins. Yeah, Johns Hopkins found out that psilocybin mushrooms not only help with PTSD, but depression, anxiety, quitting smoking, and end of life.
Exactly. There have been some studies done. I can't remember in New York as well. So New York City, they've done a lot of trials with cancer patients who have terminal cancer and helping them kind of cope with that.
Yeah, and actually it has some remarkable results, and I'm glad that they're finally starting to get to a true double blind, which I'll tell you flat out, is going to be a joke because there is no substitute for psilocybin. You know, you can give somebody niacin, they get the little scratchy on the skin, you can tell something's happening. But within an hour, you're going to know which people have had the medicine and which people are on the placebo. Mm-hmm. So it really makes truly double blinds almost laughable. But that protocol does need to be followed, in my opinion. It's the model that pharmacology understands, and right now that's where we need to stay. Personally, I would rather see it investigated with the actual mushrooms themselves. That's not the way they've chosen to go about it currently, principally because of dosage. Mm-hmm. Because if even the same species, same strain grown in two slightly different locations, they can have different amounts of the compounds. So they're working with an injectable pharmaceutical compound of these to work with. But that's not my experience. My experience many years ago was with just regular old little brown magic mushrooms. And, strangely, in order for something to be Schedule 1 in the U.S., it has to meet some criteria. Well, one of those criteria is that it's addictive. Well, in every study they've ever done, every animal study they've ever done, you put psilocybin in the water and then food in the other one, they're only going to hit the psilocybin one time and one time only. No ape, no chimpanzee, no other animal is ever going to go back and hit that button again. They're just not going to do it. It's too challenging. It's too far outside of their consensus, their norm. So, first of all, so it can't really be addictive. Not saying that psychologically you couldn't form a habit, potentially. Yeah. There are people who've done that. They got to do mushrooms every weekend or something, but I'll tell you flat out, they don't work nearly as well. There needs to be a gap between them, and honestly, that gap ought to be several years.
Well, and kind of back to the shamanism aspect of it and the sacred ritual and viewing them more as a sacrament.
Well, first of all, let me back up one more little step. That's great. But she keeps me on track.
Yeah, that's a good word. I was thinking that's what I was trying to look for earlier.
Without saying, it's hard to say what my faith is. So let's just say I'm an animist.
And what's that?
The closest, best translation I have of it is one that sees that all things are living and all things are sacred. So we see that everything is animated. There is life in rock. It's easy to see that there's life in trees, even if you can't see personality or whatever. It's hard for us to anthropomorphize trees because we just don't seem much like them. But, to me, rocks are alive. They just work on a completely different time scale than we do. And, we only exist in a blink of their eye. So if they're aware of us at all, I'd be surprised. But if they are aware of us, I'd say they're at least as good a judge of character as we are, for sure. So that being the case, I don't have this 1, 2, or 3 things are sacred. All things are sacred to me. So if you're going to undertake a ceremony with a sacrament, in this case we're talking about psilocybes, then for me it's imperative that you have some sort of a sacred structure to that. Even if it's just basic mindfulness, it doesn't have to look a particular way. You just have to be aware that you are asking this little being for a big favor. You're asking it to show you something of value, or show you something about yourself you don't know, or in the case of somebody with PTSD or high anxiety, to find a set of tools that allows you to alleviate that anxiety. And moreover, what a lot of participants find to be true is that a single dosage of these compounds can cause an almost complete cessation of symptoms. So here's somebody that's had a crippling anxiety for 10 years. They do this one ceremony and all of a sudden that fear is lessened by at least 50%. Yeah, what would that be worth to you personally? That'd be worth a lot to me.
And this is not a plant. This is something that grows naturally.
This is a natural thing. And honestly, they tried many, many years ago in animal studies to find what the LD50, pharmacology talking. What would cause
The lethal dose.
a lethal dose in 50% of the group is known as the LD50. They haven't ever even found what would kill one of them. So we're talking about such astronomical amounts that it's just not ever going to be an issue.
Yeah, it's just like marijuana. You need...
Now, that being said, someone who has, shall we say, a history of or a tendency towards a psychotic break
It's not a
can
good idea.
absolutely be exacerbated or brought on by by using these mushrooms. So to walk into this as an uneducated person is to walk away a fool.
Yeah,
What you don't know can very definitely hurt or kill you.
Yeah, I wrote an article for the website about my experimentation with psychedelics and the benefits and my personal benefits. So this was just personal experience. Because I used to be a cop, and I'm now, after stopping being a cop, I want to know why.
Why you were busting people?
Yeah, and one thing I tell people is that my biggest regret of being a cop was making pot arrest. Because now even like towards the end of my tenure, me and a lot of the cops were just not making an arrest unless it was like a big amount. We told people, okay, just get rid of it right in front of us, because it wasn't worth it. And now, but earlier in my career, one of my first arrests was the guy had a joint, and now I realize I negatively affected that guy by putting him in jail, having him post bail. Now he has a record, and I realize it's for something that's beneficial to people. It's a plant. It's not like meth or anything like that. This is something that helps people, and I use it helps me. But going back to the psychotic break, I took LSD, and I have a problem with depression and anxiety, and one of the reasons why I was taking the psychedelics is to see if it's going to help me. The LSD messed me up for a little bit. That one was too powerful, but the mushrooms, marijuana, and the DMT, I got something from each one of those. I think LSD, if I were to compare it to like what we were talking about earlier about I'm interested in the archetypes, the hero story, Carl Jung's idea of the shadow, or I think LSD showed me hell. Everything else showed me something what heaven could be. If I was being symbolic or philosophical about it.
Well, that's really interesting, though, because in the considerable number of people I've talked to over the years and mentors that I've had, we had access to good liquid Berkeley acid, so it's had those couple extra steps done to it, and it makes a radical difference. But normally, people would have that exactly the opposite of the way you described it. That they would have struggled with the mushrooms, and the LSD would have been the thing that really did it for them. Is much, much more common, at least in my experience, and I mean dramatically so.
Well,
and my belief is that for me personally, LSD works principally as a chemical molecule. Mm-hmm. It unlocks, a synergistic key in the brain that, in my opinion, allows our own endogenous DMT to come into play. That's my belief. Mm-hmm. And you have a certain modicum of control in that situation, up until a point, of course. Once past a certain dose, it doesn't matter. No ego. You don't know who you are, where you are. But at a level, you have control of that. But what I found to be true with mushrooms, at least in the shamanic setting, is, man, you're in it for the ride. You don't call no shots. You are not in charge. You are not the boss. So anybody who goes into those ceremonies without acknowledging that, hey, these guys are about to drive the bus for me, the least I can do is say thank you up front and ask them if there's anything that they need. You're about to ask a pretty big ask to, help you unravel a fear or help you get to the truth of something that's been standing in your way for a long time. And traditionally, shamanically, that's what these mushrooms were used for. They were used for finding lost things, which could be finding your lost health, which in most of the Central American cultures is a completely different thing, the way their model works. That one of the single biggest ailments in their pantheon is called susto, which the literal translation, I think, is fright. But it's strange, some of the cures they've worked out for so-called fears. And yet, we now know for sure and for certain that this particular one, the psilocybe mushrooms, absolutely works. And for people that I've been involved with, it very definitely functioned as a global reset. That it wasn't like they had to work their way out of that fear afterwards like you would tend to do if you're going with a therapist. You come to a realization, and then you dialogue it, you graph it, you study it, and work it in. But this doesn't seem to work like that. It's like all of a sudden you realize you're different. And I think one of the other things that's really important in that, I think the reason it's so helpful for so many people is because of one of its unintended side effects. It turns off your ego. So in those moments, you're suddenly looking at life in a way you've never been exposed to it before. You're looking at it without the lens of your ego. You're seeing it the closest to the way it really is that you've probably ever seen it. How many people know that? How many people have been taught that? How many people in this audience that are listening have ever heard that? Probably not very many. Some of that stuff comes with experience. And, anytime you're going to work with something that adjusts human consciousness, in my opinion, you better be damn careful with it. Because if you change brain chemistry and you can't get it back to where it was, you're going to be a different person than you've ever known yourself to be.
Yeah, that's one thing that really got me scared with LSD was I think that was a 2 months of experience. It was probably was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and I kind of got concerned for a little bit because I felt some of the effects a week later. I got a little I got a couple of panic attacks and anxiety went up, and I'm like I was kind of afraid that I messed up my own brain chemistry. So,
that brings up an interesting point. One of the things that's important for this model, if somebody's going to work with these, whether it's in a therapeutic setting, if you're going to go down to Jamaica or one of the other places where these things are legal and, work with an actual therapist and do these sessions, what you will find a critical part of that is aftercare. You have to do the upfront and you've got to do the exit work. Just doing the ceremony is a bad idea.
And that's one of the things I'll just say from reading and from knowing a little bit about shamanism. It's any sacrament like that you're going to use to help you kind of unlock or break down barriers and things like that. In that kind of situation, setting are critical. Having someone who is knowledgeable, which was where the shaman would come in, somebody who knows how to work with this particular sacrament. It's important to have those kinds of support systems. And just like Cougar was saying, and I kind of interrupted you, it's just as important to have that, that after processing portion of it. So afterwards, reflecting
like afterwards, a week later, a month later, not just directly after the ceremony.
Right.
That's good for helping you remember stuff. But if you don't do the other parts of it, number one, in my opinion, you're not going to get nearly the lessons out of it that you could have gotten for somebody that can help you to look at it.
Because that's what it is. It's all about that inner landscape and working with those things that are going on in our mind. We were talking about meditation. We were talking about a lot of other things that are prevalent in all religions. It's that quiet, that mindfulness. It's going within and looking at our inner landscape and questioning, things and just exploring our own beliefs and where we stand. And the way I hear you talk about, that's what some of these things can do. And that's why shamanism continues to exist, I think, is because it provides that sort of pathway and structure to do some of this work that our modern society doesn't really embrace.
Yeah. One thing my generation is going through, I'm noticing myself, is the disconnect. Mm-hmm. And it's hurting people. Mm-hmm. It really is hurting people. I say probably a good example of that is probably through dating. Because now I'm having a harder time with dating now, because I think people are afraid to actually be afraid of a connection. Like when, sometimes you ask a woman out and like, oh, okay, this seems to go well, but then they'll ghost on you or disappear on you. I think part of that has to do with the whole disconnect. Like, hey, you kind of forgot, like, there's another human being involved, and if you didn't like the person, or you didn't feel like the dating was going well, just say like, hey, you know what, it's not working. It's just there's a decency behind it.
Well, unfortunately, at least in the 50 plus years I've been on this planet, I've watched a very slow and now very rapid degradation of, I just call it manners collectively. And part of that's, the Amazon movement, that for the first time in our lives, we could get shit in 48 hours delivered to our door. So when we got to wait 96 hours for it, we are not happy.
Well, you don't have to interact with a person.
Right.
You go online. Which, to your point, we're now living in a digital age. And even though we have technology that can connect us easily and quickly, it's that personal interaction that seems to be, I don't know, it's not as prevalent.
It's what everybody's missing and longing for, actually. Here we are in all these little square units, all separated by these thin little boundaries, these walls, and everybody on the planet is essentially dying of one form of loneliness or another.
Yeah.
All because we just won't trust ourselves enough to trust other people.
Which you hit on, I think you hit on exactly part of what it is. It's trust. And the flip side of that is being vulnerable.
I think also, too, add to that, I had like a little theory I thought about, because of the different industries I worked in. I call it a human resources problem. I think a lot of this stems from the human, it sounds like a joke, but the human resources department is not there for the actual,
for actually helping humans.
Yeah, they're just there to protect the company.
In my day job, that's what I do. I work in human resources. So that's just ironic that but you're right. That's one of the things that I'm trying to change in my day job. Not to go off on a completely different subject.
No, go ahead.
But that's one of the things I recognize is that, it shouldn't be bureaucratic. It shouldn't be about all the policies.
It shouldn't be as complicated as they make it.
It shouldn't be as complicated.
And also, too, people are sometimes afraid to be themselves at work. And it's just, we're going through a time where everyone's oversensitive. And, you make one slip or make one joke, especially if you work with a bunch of guys, they're going to say dirty and nasty jokes, and they're not going to mean it. It's just the laugh factor. Like, they're not meaning it. They're not actual sexual predators or harassers. They're decent people. It's that type of humor.
Part of it is the culture, too.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is what you've grown up with. Part of it is, this has been prevalent. This has been the prevalent behavior for so long. It's okay. I mean, it's, is there room for all of us to be able to feel comfortable and to be able to joke? And yes. And I think that you're right. We're going through some really challenging times right now. And that pendulum is swinging way in the other direction. Mm-hmm. And hopefully it will start to come back. Yeah, it's going to start to come back, and things will normalize and balance out.
Well, I'm thinking it's starting to, because one thing about the Me Too movement, like I agree that there needs to be a little more focus on women's sexual harassment, rape, because it's out there, it does happen. Right. But one thing I felt like the Me Too movement did that was really horrible was that kangaroo court. It was just a kangaroo court, that there was no objective, like, you need to be objective. You need to do an impartial investigation because you could hurt this guy who may not did nothing. And you're starting to see that now. My friend told me the other day that the actor Jeffrey Rush, he was accused of sexual harassment and he sued and won because it proved.
He proved it wasn't true.
Yeah, it was defamation of character.
Yeah.
But as soon as it came out in the news, people just didn't want to hire him. They said like, oh, he's he harasses women.
Well, kind of going back to your earlier point, about disconnection and the fact that we don't seem to have those close interactions, those personal interactions as easily, and part of it is, I think, with all of the movements, with all of these conversations and things that are being pushed to the surface, I think we've got to address those things. And we've got to get to a point where we can be accepting, at least be respectful and accepting of one another, no matter what your gender is, your race, your sexual identification, any of those things. Just be respectful and accepting and feel okay to be vulnerable. That if it's okay for you to be that person, then hopefully it'll be easier for you to be who you really are and to be able to make those honest connections, with one another.
Yeah, it's
a tough.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough being vulnerable today, especially. I give you a good example. I don't read comments on the show or anything I write because, especially about the episodes, because the first couple lines I read is like, oh, this guy has a horrible voice. He sucks. His voice. I'm like, man, it's so pathetic. And I'm like, I'm not going to read. It's just so negative. Like, if someone writes me an email, I do respond back because I feel like if you took the time to actually write it.
Sure.
But I just won't read comments. And I know I have to remind myself, like, not all people think like that. And it's just, unfortunately, there's people out there who are just trolls or just really negative people.
Yeah. And that's one of the things with social media. I think, it's made it so easy for everybody to have an opinion and for everybody to have a comment, whether they really believe it or not. It's almost like it's a way to posture and try to position yourself. And the other downside, I think, with all the social media is that, we're constantly trying to curate that perfect life. Like to show through pictures and things you post on Instagram, look how perfect my life is. But that's not reality.
No, we all have problems. We all have insecurities.
Exactly.
That's what, I don't follow, I have the Instagram for the show, and I just follow a couple of poetic stuff and a little uplifting stuff, but I don't follow Instagram models or anything like that because I just feel like it's just...
Well, I mean, we try to do the things that, we feel are good in our lives and as, business decisions and whatnot. We try to have a conscience based on what our heart tells us. Not necessarily what our bottom line tells us. You know when you're doing the right thing and you damn well know when you're not. So, first of all, we all need to take even more time to become more personally responsible. I know there's a lot of people working on that one. It's a big buzzword and everything, but personal responsibility, in my opinion, is about realizing first and foremost, there's nobody on this entire planet that can make you mad. There is nobody on this entire planet that can make you sad. The only person that can do that is yourself. And everybody on this planet wants to have their opinion heard, and I'm totally for that. But what the part I don't understand is you want to have such a right to your own opinion, but the first time somebody gives a different opinion than that, you want to squelch that opinion, and you have no right to say that. And yet everybody wants to have a right to say. So, and we've as a society, I feel like we have a form of hysterical blindness. We have a form of blindness most people don't even recognize they have. They have a bias, an entire set of biases, both for and against. And most people are ready and waiting to get offended at a word's notice. I have taken time to word a response so carefully that it cannot possibly be misinterpreted, and I've still had trolls jump down my throat. So, haters are always going to hate, and honestly, if you're at the center of controversy, chances are you're probably doing something right.
Yeah, it's a strange world we're living in right now.
Indeed, it's getting stranger every day.
All right, so we're going to go to the question part of the interview. For any returning listeners, I thank you. And for any new ones, I thank you too. This part of the interview is where I ask these interpersonal questions, which are psychological questions. Some of them are really fun, goofy. Other ones are very not personal, but very, sometimes serious questions. The reason why I ask these questions is because one, it's going to show another side of the people I interview, and two, I want to show people that, because the different subjects I cover on the show, different people I cover, just because you may disagree with this person on what they live, or how they live, or their beliefs, doesn't mean you can share something with them. That you can share a part of their story and see it from their eyes. So that's the reason why I ask these questions. So we'll get started. So this one's a fun one. Given the choice of anyone in the world from any time period, who would you want as a dinner guest and why?
Do we have to pick just one?
No.
Well, this is a game we like to routinely play. So we have an entire sitting worked out at this point. The ones that commonly end up on that list would be the recently deceased Anthony Bourdain.
Mm-hmm.
He's been on that list way longer than he's been gone. Wow, I'm drawing a blank at the moment. David Bowie shows up pretty commonly.
David Bowie.
The philosopher's not quite as often. Einstein shows up from time to time. So yeah, it kind of mixes around a little bit. But and why was the other part of it. For me, I like expanding my horizons. I don't mind being the smartest guy in the room, but that's not my preference. I don't mind being the dumbest guy in the room. That means I'm surrounded by some brilliant people, and I dig that. So,
or you can do
for
sit
us,
down, shut
anything
up and
about
listen.
expanding our horizons and finding out more about what makes people who they are is what makes us tick.
Well, you took mine.
Sorry.
I was going to say Anthony Bourdain just for a number of reasons, but I was really impressed by how he took his life, working in a restaurant, being a chef, the struggles that he went through, and how he kind of shared that, and he didn't let the negative stop him. He actually used it to inform him, and then opened up this world to a whole audience. He went to all of these unusual places, and I loved how the arc of his show changed over time, and it went from being focused on food to being focused on people. And just like you're talking about, and it's very similar to what you're doing with this podcast. He went out looking for the human story. He went out looking for what made us more alike than different. And so that was what really impressed me about the work he did.
Yeah, it's one thing like I was telling you guys earlier at lunch, that's something I wish to do. Was like what he did was just go around the world and find these people, and he did it with food.
Yeah,
he did it with.
Yeah,
I remember watching an episode. I didn't watch too much of them.
Mm-hmm.
When he died, CNN was showing some reruns. Oh no, they were showing a new season.
Yeah,
and I think this is the one where he went to Jerusalem.
Yeah,
then he went to Palestine to eat, and he's Jewish, ethnically Jewish. But they allowed him. They were happy that he was there to share dinner, and that's how culture is. Like you bond over food.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that is one of those things we all have to have. We all have to have one form of sustenance or another, and we all have to breathe the air. And obviously, we're all way more alike than we are different anyway. So this whole thing about focusing on color of skin or what sex we are or any of that, in my opinion, is to not give the human species its full due. You're trying to limit it. You're trying to make it fit in a box. You're trying to make it convenient. And humans are inconvenient, and I think we're probably destined to always be that, because we are explorers by our very nature. And we see something we don't know about. If we're excited about it, we got to learn more. If not, well, you walk past it and look for something else that turns you on. But so anything that helps you get up in the morning, anything that helps inspire you to change the world, which some people like the Tony Robbins and those, kind of folks of the world, the Oprah Winfreys, they have these huge platforms where they can affect social change potentially on a huge scale. We don't have the advantage of that platform, however, we have numbers. There's a lot of people out there like us who see that, mushrooms and the things that we do with them can radically alter the human experience for the better. And, obviously the shamanism can do something about helping us return to our roots. And I mean, if you look at all the native prophecies about the end times, so to speak, that one of the big ones is that one day the sons and daughters of our oppressors will once again return to us to learn a new way to live. I say we're about 30 years overdue on that. But so in essence, when I started working with the Native American elders that I worked with, that's what they were in the process of teaching us. And none of us knew that at the time. We thought we were learning ceremony. We thought we were learning native heritage. Whatever. We didn't realize we were supposed to be the next generation, whether we're native or not. But as they put it, you were born on this planet. Your parents were born on this planet. You are native. So there again, to focus on this bias of what constitutes native and what doesn't, and how much blood you have to be considered native and all of this. It's like if you were born on this earth, you're native. This idea of a native Russian or a native American or a native whatever, all of these are human constructs. These are not constructs of nature.
That's good. Very deep. What would constitute a perfect day for you?
Do you want me to go first? Okay, a perfect day for me would be waking up when I want to, not from an alarm clock, a great cup of coffee, being able to just, do some work on the mushroom business, work on Phenomenal Fungi, and write some blog posts, and maybe go for a hike in the afternoon, go have a really good meal somewhere. I would probably drag him along with me. An ideal day would be doing all of that from some other country, maybe Costa Rica or somewhere like that. So getting to travel.
Costa Rica.
Okay. Well, this is going to be a fun one. For the most part, even though, it's kind of hard to have a day turn out like you think it's ever going to look, but once you can get past that, for me, I pretty well live a perfect day. Because what I get to do every day, what I'm privileged to get to do every day, is to find a better way to integrate mushrooms into our life and therefore other people's. Whether that's developing a new product or a new way of making a tincture or just some way to, like I said, the only way I know how to change the world is one person at a time. It's the only format I ever learned. Could I get up in front of 80,000 people and talk? Well, I guess after the first 10 minutes, I'd probably do all right. But that first 10 minutes would probably be a little sketchy. But anyway.
If you could change anything about the way you were raised, what would it be?
Sitting here at this point, it's hard to say that I would want to change anything, because if I did, I wouldn't be living the life I'm living now. I was very fortunate. I had parents who loved me.
Still married, still together.
Married, still together, still love
each other.
Still love each other. So I've had a really good base there. They always encouraged me. One of the greatest things I took away from my childhood is my mother teaching me to love libraries and to love reading, and that anything I wanted to know, I could find. I don't know. That's a hard question.
Honestly, I don't know how I'm going to answer it any better. principally it's a worldview issue. I just don't see it that way. But, yeah, I don't know how to expand upon that any further.
All right.
I agree so completely with what she said. I'm just going to let that stand as stated. That wasn't a cop-out.
No, it's good to hear something like that because I didn't come from a good family, and had a rough childhood. But it's nice to know stuff. That's not the entire world.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? That that's and that one day when I have my family, it will never be like you. One day I promise myself my kids will never ever feel what I have to feel.
Right.
Well, and I hope you manage to figure out how to make that the case.
No.
Because some do, some don't. I think it's how dedicated you are to it, and but I certainly have the highest of hopes that you'll work that out because you're looking for it.
Right. I was going to say, I think I have seen people who have friends who had challenging childhoods and took that and learned from it and have been very intentional in how they've structured their lives and, who they interact with, their choice of spouse and how they're raising their children. And so they have done exactly what you're talking about. They've really taken those early life lessons and have made the most from it. So turned it into something positive.
Yeah, and you hit the keynote. There's finding the right spouse.
Mm-hmm.
I almost made a mistake by marrying the wrong woman, but
it happens.
But now, I've learned, no, it's better to be patient. And
it took us a long time to find each other. We both, we
were both previously
before.
married.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it happens. But
and if we'd met 15 years earlier, I don't think she could have stood me. Because I wasn't mature. Well, I'm not mature now, but I'm more mature than I was. You're just different people. So, yeah,
mm-hmm.
trying to change one thing here. And the only reason I didn't comment further is that my upbringing was virtually identical to hers. Different family, but
mm-hmm.
same thing. It's like I've fought with my brother 3 or 4 times in my whole life. I've only ever hit him once. Wouldn't do it now. I'd draw back a nub. He's got a black belt in a couple of disciplines, but was in scouting my whole life, and so that started my lifelong love affair with the natural world. I started getting turned on to nature at 7 or 8 years old with my dad, and then getting involved, with scouting. And so, yeah, man, I can think of things that I would have added, but I can't think of anything I would have subtracted.
I will say this about finding the right person to share your life with. I do believe that there are seasons
mm-hmm.
in our lives, and I think people come in and out for various reasons. But I think probably the thing that worked the best for me was doing a lot of my own work. So really doing my own work, getting really clear about who I am and what I want in my life, what's important to me, and then being patient. And patience was a hard thing for me. But waiting until the right person came along. So.
That's a whole other fascinating story of how we met anyway, but.
Yeah, what's the story?
I'll get into that briefly. We were both kind of playing around with the whole computer dating thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had just come out of a marriage, and I married an Australian girl and moved over there, and didn't work out, and we weren't married long enough for me to get a residency visa, so I had to come back here. Otherwise, I wouldn't have met either one of y'all, because I'd still be in Australia. But anyway, long story short, wow, what parts of that do I want to tell? Sorry.
I'll tell it.
Yeah.
So I was on a dating site and had been on it for 3 months, and I think it was the last week. My subscription was about to expire, and so there was one more weekend in it. And they were having a free weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So he had signed up to do the free weekend. And I remember seeing your profile come across, and this is back in the day when you still had to read through profiles and everything. It wasn't just swiping. And I remember reading his profile and thinking, wow, he sounds really interesting. we still disagree about this. He says that I clicked on his. So like I, reached out to him first. I'm like, no, you reached out to me first. I don't know how it happened. But anyway, we got connected and, we talked. We talked for like 2 hours as I was driving back from South Carolina. I was living in Georgia at the time. And we were actually in the same city. And we talked for like 2, maybe 3 hours. And I remember asking him stuff. Or no, maybe that was later. I swore there was information in his profile that when I went back and looked, it wasn't there. It was the craziest thing. It was just this kind of weird, magical sort of thing.
It's a style of writing, actually. It's called shamanic writing. And the idea is that it's not about the words that you wrote on the piece of paper. It's about what your intentions were when you wrote them. So it is possible to convey information that is not directly written on a page. In this case, the idea for me, and this was an experiment, the idea for me was instead of just trying to find the right language of the person I thought might be the right person for me, I was trying to write for somebody I did not know who the right person for me was. So you have to write from a very specific intention to not know specifically what you're asking for.
So in other words, you were looking for your best possible outcome?
Yes.
Best possible person?
And if I didn't find it, I'm a dead man if I ever find her. I mean, one of the things that Shannon and I figured out really early in this process for us is that our connection is a source of energy. So we actually can produce our own energy.
That's a whole
other episode. But the reason I'm telling people that is I understand that relationships can be really, really hard, and I've been through some really hard ones, and I came from a place of almost perfection. I grew up in a very privileged life, and so I met some people that were really broken. And somehow managed to see them as that. They weren't bad people. They were just broken. They'd had hard circumstances and didn't know any other way. They weren't being disrespectful. They weren't being mean. They were just being themselves. And, there's I cannot stress this enough. If there's any question at all in who you're with, that's not the right one. Because when you know, you absolutely know. And up until then, I would have said that is the mark of poets and fools. There's no such thing as love at first sight, except at the very first moment I ever saw this lady.
And I was still in my car.
She was still in her car. She drove past me. She drove past where we were meeting, and I somehow knew, oh my God, that's her. Oh my God. And this wasn't based on looks. I couldn't even see her at that range. This was based on an absolute connect. So if you don't have that in your relationship, keep working. Keep doing the things. And honestly, one of my teachers said that when dealing with spouses and things of that nature, it's not about finding the right spouse. It's about being the right spouse.
Exactly.
If both of you aren't being yourselves, you're being codependent at very best.
And this is trite, and they say it all the time in relationship books and on relationship, sites and everything else. But you have to love yourself first, and that's true.
This is a fact.
That's what I mean about doing your work. So doing the work on yourself, getting to the place where you really like yourself, where you really care about yourself, and you're not going to settle for somebody that, one, doesn't care as much about you as you do, or two, doesn't respect you as much as you respect yourself, or doesn't respect themselves. They've got to love themselves too. And that's what he means by, if we had met 15 years, even 10 years earlier, it wouldn't have worked.
Neither one of us were ready for each other.
No.
We might have been good at relationships, but there's still days.
And don't get me wrong, it takes work. It's continuous.
Anybody that tells you otherwise is either thoroughly graced or they're not being truly honest.
Yeah.
Relationships, good, real, feeling, connected, vulnerable relationships take work. It shouldn't be like pulling teeth.
No, it's
effort.
It's little tweaks. It's
effort. So we don't really call it work because in our case, we had already done a lot of the work.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I went boring you.
No. I went out. Just let everyone know I went out last night. I had too much to drink, and I still feel tired from it. It's also
it's overcast.
The overcast
this
too.
Is like a good day for a nap.
Yeah, but it's beautiful though. The overcast with the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you wake up tomorrow and gain any power or ability, what would it be and why?
Damn it. These are tough questions. Should have done my homework. Okay.
Wow, the one I heard is crazy too.
Oh, well, go for it.
One of the things that's important for me in my life is about clarity. So, everything can be true from a particular perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So, pick a truth that works, firstly. Having a hard time articulating what I'm trying to think here.
You need some clarity.
No. Here it is. Clarity is such an important thing for me that one of the things that can interfere with my ability to, find the right course of action in an unknown, like working with an unknown substrate or an unknown mushroom, there has to be a way to get outside of oneself on that. So for me, I would want to have greater clarity so that I can fully recognize in that moment what I need to do and not look at it and recognize it later, which seems to be much more commonly the case with most of us.
Wow, I was going to say I wanted to fly. But that seems kind of mundane.
No.
I mean, that would be cool, but actually what I was thinking was kind of along the same lines of what you were talking about. It's not that I want the superpower of ultimate confidence, but I don't want to question myself. I'd like to be more of a risk taker, I guess.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So flying goes along with that.
Sure, absolutely. That first step.
This is a fun one. What conspiracy theories do you believe in?
If you're calling it a conspiracy theory, it's probably already a fact.
I'm not even going to speak on that one because I think he believes in most of them.
There again, it's all about truth, so anything is true from a perspective. Here's one of the ones that people have heard me gripe about the longest, so let's start there. Chemtrails. Anybody that believes this grid that is sprayed in the air is somehow the ordinary exhaust from airplanes, in my opinion, is not very well educated. I've seen a lot of both. I know the difference. And for 20-something years, we've been told we're not spraying anything. And yet, 4 years ago, they admitted to, actually, yeah, we are spraying, but it's not the reasons you think. It's because we're terraforming, we're geoforming. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in other words, you've just told me you're using an untested technology over a domestic population without our consent. And you've been doing it for 20 years and lying about it, is in essence what you've just told me. So, whether you want to call that a conspiracy theory, or in my case, what I want to call it is something that never should have happened. And life is full of them, but ultimately, my belief system says that all things are as they should be. So I don't get to pick and choose and say, well, everything's the way it should be except that. Because I don't currently yet understand why this would be necessary. And in this case, maybe it's for us to learn that you can't do shit that way. Maybe that's what humanity needs to learn, that when we break a system, we can't use the same thought process to fix it, because all we're going to do is break it differently. And then we've got two brokens we got to fix. So I think a lot of those conspiracy theories are kind of like Hollywood. 50% of what they say is true. If you can tell the difference in which 50% is which, then you can do something with it. If you can't, it's all going to be a show to you. So be entertained by it or find something else to do. Go be outside. Go put your feet on the earth.
All right. Let's see. What was the most terrifying moment in your life?
Okay. It was probably when my now ex-husband told me he didn't want to be married anymore. because that was, it was actually a good thing.
That's not the reason I'm shaking my head.
Okay.
The reason I'm shaking my head, ladies and gentlemen, is because the same exact situation is what mine is. Oh. And just to give you a basic cue, we were sitting at the table. She was doing the checkbook. She said, "I don't want to do this anymore." I said, "Here, hand it to me. I'll do it." That is not what she was talking about. She no longer wanted to be married. So talking about out of nowhere, no idea it was coming, hip kick to the stomach, and yet the worst day, most biggest fear of my life resulted in this woman right here. So for everybody out here who's thinking your life can't get any worse, my life's over, there's no way I can live through this, there's no way I can recover from this kind of pain. Let me tell you, you're stronger than you think, and that the motivation of a good woman can take you anywhere.
Aww.
So anybody who doesn't believe that, look into it. See if you agree with me. If you do, then great. If you don't, well, better luck next time.
What are your deepest held beliefs?
I can do this one easy. There's a word in Lakota. It's hokahe. And it gets mistranslated all the time. And I'm certainly no expert in Lakota. If there might be any Lakota listeners out there, please don't be offended if I'm wrong. My understanding is that it means everything is as it should be. But it keeps getting translated as "it's a good day to die," because I guess that sounds good in movies and shit. But what it really, it's a belief system. It's a tenet of belief that all things are as they should be. So the trick sometimes is when you have a day that looks completely unlike what you were hoping it would look like in the day, to be able to justify that as this is the way this needed to happen and trying to understand why that is some of the very hardest interpersonal work that I still do on myself on a regular basis. But it's the most worthwhile work I can think of because nobody else on this planet can teach me that. The only person that can do that is me.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would also say I think that one of my deepest held beliefs is everything in this life is sacred. All of us are sacred. We're all miracles if you think about it. This entire planet is a miracle. And because of that, back to your point, everything is as it should be. And just like what we were sharing earlier, if those things hadn't happened in our lives, we wouldn't be here. So we had to go through those bad times to get to this time.
Challenging times.
Okay, challenging times. Words are important. So, yeah.
For me, I'm not a formal student of NLP or neuro-linguistic programming, but several of my teachers were. And they were very, very good at it. And one of the things that they stressed to me over and over and over is the absolute importance of the use of words. Words, like any sounds, are vibrations. So the particular vibrations that you emanate out into the universe is what will call a particular something into existence. So if you want to recognize what life shows you, you have to be conscious about what you're putting out there. Because otherwise, you're not going to recognize what comes back if you don't remember what question you asked. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So all these simple little things, in my opinion, I think we should all have been taught in middle school. Like we were talking about earlier at lunch. Simple things. How to meditate. How to get our mind clear. How to breathe. There you go. How to breathe. We all know how to just inflate our lungs and deflate them, but most people don't realize that they can learn to shift their consciousness at a level that it takes most people psychedelics to work with. But it's possible to do it through straight breath work. So if you like the idea of the work and the psychedelics or the substance is what scares you, look into doing breath work. Look into meditation. One of the things that all of the religions and more importantly, all of the spiritual beliefs on the planet have in common is getting the mind quiet. Every single culture I've ever studied has some kind of practice for quieting the mind. That is not an accident. There's a reason why there's such emphasis put on that. There's a reason why every elder I've ever worked with has drilled that in my head. And it's because without it, if you can't get past your own mind, you are well and truly stuck exactly where you are. So if you want to change your outcome, you want to change your experience, go read Michael Pollan's book and learn how to change your own mind. Because that is the key to transformation, in my opinion. We were talking about alchemy a little before. One of the things I'm exploring, the next iteration for our tinctures, is making spagyric tinctures, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a way of extracting these compounds from plants or mushrooms or whatever in a way that is more energetically intact. So we're not just removing stuff. We're seeking to make it as intact as we can make it. And but we hear about alchemy, and the only thing we ever hear about alchemy is the Harry Potter stuff, about taking the sorcerer's stone and transforming base metals, lead, into gold. Well, that's one part of it. It's very much like in my opinion, the religious texts of the world. Not only can they be taken literally, but they can also be taken figuratively, and both are valid, not just one or the other. So there's also in alchemy, it's about personal transformation. It's about turning our basal animal instincts into divinity. How to translate the unknown into the known, and yet fully knowing the whole time that the unknowable will always be the unknowable to us.
He gets deep.
Yeah, that was really...
Yeah,
I told you wormholes were a problem. We can get stuck.
It's really deep. All right. What is your most treasured memory?
a lot. It's funny, they all involve family and friends.
Big surprise.
Yeah.
I got one that's sticking out, and only because it just sticks out. The first time I ever watched an animal being born was a little baby deer.
Oh.
I mean, I started to talk about this beautiful woman here beside me, but at this point, y'all are probably getting bored with that. But, I mean, this is just as true. I mean, that was one of those, in that moment, I recognized what an absolute miracle this is. And it wasn't from a place of ego or mind. This was from a place of knowing of, hey, this is how nature does things.
And that's so interesting, because one of the ones that's, I mean, obviously I thought, think about you, and then I'm thinking about my niece and my nephew and your nieces. I mean, all of our kids, and, we don't have kids ourselves, but our collective family. But the one that really sticks out is also an animal. It's also animal related. And I think that's because it's, I don't know, we seem to have such, not easy, but less complicated relationships with animals, with our pets. But it's with Cisco, my cat. I had a cat for almost 18 years, and he didn't like men, but he loved David. He loved Cougar. And
not every day, though.
No, he could be cranky.
He could be cranky here every once in a while,
But I just have this memory of him sitting in my lap and just looking up at me with just, this look of unconditional love.
Which is rare in a cat for you people that don't own cats.
But yeah, that for whatever reason, that sticks out. That sounds crazy. But I have some great memories with my niece and my nephew, too, so they're fun people.
What was the biggest sacrifice you made in your life?
Well, I was not expecting this one as an answer, but I only relay what I hear, so I'm going to go with what I heard. Deciding not to have kids. I mean, there were some practical reasons in there. Part of it was you kind of got to have your wife first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Only just now got with the right one, and kids at 54 ain't a freaking option. No way, no how. So
that's true for me too. But I also think, well, no, you're saying sacrifice. Wow, I went to regret.
I don't have it as a regret. I don't regret that decision. And all my friends been telling me for years, "Oh, you'd make a great dad." Exactly. I don't have anything to prove. I know all of that. That wasn't my priority this time. I think my priority was to help the people, and sometimes that's just the ones that the Creator puts in my way.
Well,
I don't seek it out.
That, and I think the old adage is true. It takes a village to raise kids. And so I think we've both been like additional support people.
We're aunts and uncles. We can go home when it gets too hard or too long.
And we are additional support people for these other people who are growing up and becoming adults and everything. But I can't look at anything as a sacrifice. And I guess this goes back to my basic philosophy and belief that everything happens for a reason, and if I hadn't made the choices or done the things I did, I wouldn't be where I am now. So it's hard to look at that as a sacrifice. It's a good question.
That's a brilliant question. You ask great questions.
All right. Well, this is going to be the last question, and this is a question that's it's a two-part question, and it's pretty deep. And I ask everyone this question, and I leave it for the end. What is the worst thing have you ever done in life, and what is the best thing you've ever done in life?
The worst thing, I think, I broke somebody's heart. And yes, we all have challenging relationships, or we have relationships that don't work out. But I don't think I treated this person with respect in the way I could have. I could have handled it a lot differently, and I think I caused a lot of unnecessary pain. So, yeah, that's definitely.
And then what about the
best thing? Mm-hmm. I keep you around every day?
Well, that's best for me. I don't know about for you. That makes your life more challenging.
It's certainly more interesting.
No argument here.
No. The best thing, I think, it's not just one thing. Well, I guess it could go back to one thing, is making a decision to live my life for me.
And knowing that is not being selfish.
Right. No, not in a selfish way, but in an honoring who I am and trusting who I am and choosing to do the things that are best for me. Yeah, that's probably the best thing.
Okay, well, my worst one, let's just say, I don't want to get too many details, but let's say I made a decision that could have taken me out of the gene pool, and the person that it just about destroyed was my own mother. And this is a woman who's been my biggest cheerleader my whole life. That's told me my whole life I can do whatever I set my mind to. And yeah, to watch how a stupid choice that I made impacted her so negatively was, I had to work to forgive myself long after she'd gotten best as you'll ever get over it. The best thing for me, I think, is an ongoing. And one of the things that gets me out, one of the things I like to do, and I don't try to make a pattern out of it and do it every day, but it's those random acts of kindness. It's that constantly being aware that a miracle is right there in front of you if you can just find it. And which one of those people is it you need to interact with to find out about it? And then allowing yourself to be drawn to that person. So for me, finding that way to have an interaction that results in a magical result is a goal of mine. And so I think that's one of the best ways that we show wisdom, love, all those things back to those people around us, is by doing that we reflect what we've learned or what we can share with others and maybe make their maybe make their load easier if that's what's for them, or maybe educate them if they just need more information. Or, the trick is, I think we got to meet people where they are if we're going to do that. So if you want to be selfless and you want to do selfless acts for people, you really do have to learn to be totally natural with it. You can't plan it. It really does have to be impromptu and heartfelt at the time. And it results in such a beautiful magic that I don't even know how to create it. So I have to just keep looking for it until I find it.
All right. Well, I want to thank you guys. This was a really great episode. Thank you for letting me come to your house.
Our pleasure.
Up here in North Carolina, in the mountains. Why don't you tell everyone how they can find you guys?
Sure. So our website is Phenomenal Fungi, spelled just like it sounds, PHENOMENALFUNGI.com. He picked the name. Or our phone number, which is, wait, go ahead.
It's 1-833-GO-FUNGI.
His favorite part of all of our, sort of business stuff is the phone number. But yeah, we also have a shop on Etsy, which is also Phenomenal Fungi, and we're on Facebook and Instagram. On Instagram, we're Phenom Fungi, and Facebook, it's Phenomenal Fungi LLC. So, yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Thank you. This was a really great episode. For everyone that's listening, thank you guys again for listening. Come check out the website, ataboolife.com, where you can read some interesting articles, some stories, some poems on there, because I am that sappy. And you can check out other episodes of the podcast too. And don't forget to subscribe. I hope you guys have a good week.